Hello, and welcome to IRI Growth Insights, featuring IRI thought leaders, industry partners, and guests. For more than 40 years, IRI has been known for its invaluable data, but these podcasts delve into the insights the data reveal to fuel market disruption and market growth for those in the CPG, retail, healthcare, and media markets. I'm your host, Joan Driggs, coming to you from IRI's corporate headquarters in Chicago. Hello, and welcome to IRI Growth Insight Podcast. We're in the fall season, which means that businesses are deep into planning for 2023. And a big part of that is forecasting, which, spoiler alert, isn't annual anymore. Today, I'm speaking with my colleague, Nagi Jonnalagadda, a Senior Vice President of Global Products and Solutions here at IRI. Welcome, Nagi.
Hey, Joan. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So Nagi just published a paper forecasting for an uncertain market, and that's available at iriworldwide.com. You can look under insights and then under publications. And so Nagi, maybe it's due to the volatility of our current CPG market, including high inflation, or maybe it's because we have more tools. But we're seeing that the way we forecast has changed. The days of forecasting for that year ahead is long gone. Instead, companies and brands are continually updating their forecasts based on new or changing inputs. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think one of the big changes we've seen as we have worked with our CPG and manufacturer clients is a change in thinking in how they think about forecasts. Pre-pandemic, there used to be more point-in-time estimates, and people would develop a forecast and get away from it for a year. But now, companies that are in this market, they are struggling to fully understand how consumer demand is constantly changing, and the companies that are good navigators are very closely monitoring all the inputs and revising the forecasts more regularly than once a year, right? And what are the factors that are driving that change? Consider everything from inflation to impact of COVID-19 to the war in Ukraine. There are a lot of factors to consider.
Yeah, but if we're constantly changing our forecasting, how does that impact planning? Do we need shorter cycles? Is that possible?
That's definitely what we're seeing, right? When we think about how CPGs used to tackle pricing, price changes used to happen, about once a year or maybe twice a year, and now we're seeing that happening, a lot more frequently, right? It's just driven by things that are completely outside their control. It's inflation, it's labor shortages, it's supply chain challenges, raw material shortages. All of these are contributing to having them to rethink how they need to handle price and promotion strategies, right? So, we are working with clients that are wanting to change price 3 times a year, right? And that means that a forecast that was done 3 months ago is not valid anymore because our pricing strategy in the market has changed completely, right? So definitely there are slightly shorter planning cycles than before. And that's, again, added to a lot of the complexity in understanding demand.
And honestly, I see the digital shelf, the different digital pricing at the shelf. So those prices are changing far more frequently than 3 times a year, for sure.
Right. That's those were considered as advantages or unique value propositions for e-commerce before, and definitely that has become a tool in how they're managing pricing and addressing demand.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. That's interesting that it's bled through the channels. I like that. So that is a lot to consider. And in your paper, you outline a lot of the major trends that companies should be considering when making their forecasts. I mean, obviously, you can't list out every single thing, but I know that you have to be looking at this through a couple of different lenses. So can you share with us how you strategize around forecasting? What are the bigger overarching themes that you look at?
Yeah. So I think before I get into that, one of the things to remember is, as we're talking about more agile demand planning, we are basically looking at forecasts more as scenarios with confidence intervals rather than a point estimate, right? Because there are so many factors that are at play at this point, and each of them have different ways that they can evolve, and each of them will have a different way that they will impact consumer demand. So more and more, our clients are looking at forecasts more as scenarios, with broad upsides and downsides possible, depending on how these factors might evolve, rather than estimates that are like a baseline.
Very
Right.
interesting. So
Right.
you do see the clients are far more flexible and they're willing to kind of change as different inputs impact their business.
That's right. That's right. And again, to your earlier question, there are a lot of trends or factors that are impacting consumer demand, right? And I'm going to talk about it from three lenses. So the first is around consumer behavior, right? How consumer behavior is changing to address some of the struggles that they're having on their wallet, how inflation is impacting their spend, and how they're addressing or how they're tackling impact of COVID, right? And then the second big aspect is around macro or external factors that are typically beyond the control of a retailer or a manufacturer, right? That still impact consumer demand. And then the third, that's easier for a lot of our clients, is what they do at the store or in-store execution strategies that impact demand, right? These are what manufacturers and retailers are doing to address consumer demand, right? So the three lenses in which we look at how demand is changing over time.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the consumer behavior, because from the paper, consumers aren't even behaving necessarily as you anticipated that they would right now.
That's right. That's right. And there are a couple of different and very important aspects of consumer behavior that I want to talk about. So one is how they are reacting to the price changes that are happening in the marketplace, and then the second is the shifting behaviors around channels. Right, we have seen that initially when COVID hit us, and we are continuing to see that change, in a different way now. Right.
So where they were shopping one channel for everything, now they're shopping multiple channels.
That's right. That's right. And of course the behavior in relation to e-commerce, right, or online shopping has also evolved. So that's the third factor. And then a fourth important factor is how they're trading off in-home consumption with with out-of-home consumption. Right.
Yeah. We see, like, in that the trade-offs that I'm seeing are that people still want to dine out, but they're having to trade down in terms of like the quality or the money that they spend, per check, if you will.
That's right. That's right. And so let's maybe get into some of these in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about the reaction to price increases, right, I would say that it's been unprecedented from a CPG standpoint, with lower than expected price sensitivity in the recent past. Right. Now,
meaning that consumers are still willing to pay those prices even as they rise.
That's right. So inflation is continuing its successful run, and it doesn't look like it will be tamed anytime soon, right? And after seeing years of low inflation, now consumers are having to adjust to a new reality since the pandemic, right? But so far, I would say that they've been pretty resilient. And what we're seeing is a overall milder reaction to the continuing price increases, right? And I'm going to quote some numbers from our September price check report. For instance, in the last 6 months, food and beverage prices have increased 10 to 15% on average, right? But unit sales have only declined in the low single digit range.
Wow.
Right? But we are starting to see a bigger impact on perimeter sales than on center of store sales, right? And what that means is we're starting to see a shift in consumer behavior. And the big question is not if, but when we will reach an inflection point, in their reaction to declines in units or volume.
But it's that's kind of an interesting view, because the perimeter part of the store. I did a podcast with Crystal Bois talking about proteins, animal proteins in particular, meat and poultry.
Mm-hmm.
And those prices look like they're just moderately up compared to a year ago. But that's because it's hiding the fact that prices really surged in the second half of 2021. So now that we see these big price increases in center store, people are kind of almost thinking, oh, well, it's a better deal in the fresh perimeter, but that's really not the case.
Right. And we also have to remember that the products in the perimeter, from a fresh perspective, are typically higher priced per serving than center of store, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've seen this in the past recessions. That does come into play as consumers decide, what to put in their basket.
So when you talk about a tipping point, where consumers will have hit a wall and said enough is enough, is that, do you think, going to be how long inflation lasts, or is it going to be more of a look, my budget just can't take the strain anymore? Is it a combination? What does that tipping point look like that we need to be watching out for?
It's going to be a combination, right? And we're going to talk about some of the macro factors soon, and like what we're expecting from a recession standpoint, how it's going to impact incomes and spending power. That's going to change a lot of things in terms of where the demand is going to be within the store. The second aspect around channel behaviors, right? There is no doubt that macroeconomy and inflationary pressures have impacted everyone, right? But it has definitely impacted lower and middle income shoppers more than higher income shoppers. And we are starting to see more distinctly a bifurcation in shopping behaviors. On one hand, there is a migration away from grocery channel to mass merchants like Target and Walmart, and to value-driven dollar stores, right? So consumers are seeking value, and going to the channels that provide them that value, right? On the other hand, club channel that typically caters to higher income shoppers is doing extremely well, relatively speaking, right? We saw shift to certain channel preferences during the pandemic in 2020, and evolved into slightly different patterns in 21. And then now we're seeing, again, seeking of value and seeking products that get them to maybe lower baskets, maybe better value through larger packages, right?
Yep.
And that's where mass and club are coming into play.
I think that during the pandemic, particularly in the case of club, a lot of consumers took some of their stimulus money and invested in membership. And, particularly if you're a large family, or maybe you're even sharing a membership with another household, you do see that value of making the larger volume purchase. And as you said, there's a lot of households that really can only do that paycheck to paycheck shopping, where they're looking for the lowest price point possible. So I definitely see what you're saying there.
And this shifting channel purchase behavior is going to require manufacturers to think about how to forecast demand by not just total US but also by channel. And then the third aspect of consumer demand is out of home versus at home consumption, right? And this is related to how consumers are constantly trading off between at home and out of home consumption, right? When the pandemic hit, everything turned inside, meaning at home consumption skyrocketed, and the shares of at home spend compared to out of home spend kind of went through the roof, again in relative terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
But out of home spend has increased considerably in the last 12 months as people are spending more time outside. They're vaccinated, and there's been pent up demand for eating out and traveling and all of that. But what we are seeing is the out of home costs are rising on par with at home costs, right?
I thought that restaurant inflation was lower than at home, like grocery inflation.
Yeah, more in the last few months, but when you kind of look at it as a 12-month average, it's at least on par with at home, right?
Okay.
And a higher starting point on a kind of per serving basis to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And so when you put all of those into together, that can kind of put a damper, especially in a worsening economic situation for out of home spend.
Well, and despite inflation of any size, whether for out of home or at home, that price of a restaurant meal still costs 3.5 times what you would pay if you just sourced your food from the grocery store.
Exactly. And that relative affordability and lower per serving costs should drive sustained growth in food at home, especially in the next 9 to 12 months.
And keep in mind, we have a much larger percentage of the workforce continuing to work from home. So that's more meals at home right there too. So both of those things that you just described really are favorable to CPG or food at home, right?
That's right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that aspect a little bit later. The other aspect around consumer behavior is related to e-commerce or online shopping, right? So e-commerce and CPG has seen tremendous growth driven by COVID-19, and by some estimates, adoption has accelerated by 3 to 5 years in CPG, right? And both manufacturers and retailers have reacted by investing heavily in enabling e-commerce. And unfortunately, growth has slowed down a little bit and returning back to pre-pandemic trends, right? Again, this very strong growth in e-commerce, compared to brick and mortar, but it's not as gung-ho as in 2020.
But are we losing the big gain? We're not losing the big gains that were made during the pandemic, are we?
No, I mean, again, the growth is still there, but it's just slowing.
Got it.
Right. And that's again in some ways, a new reality for manufacturers and retailers in a very short time period. Right. And what's driving is trips have returned, right? But wallets are stretched and baskets are shrinking, right? All of these are pointing to potential struggles for online purchases in the short term, right? But when we think about the long term, we also have to remember that per capita consumption is fairly constant over time. So growth in one channel has to come at the expense of the other channel, right? So e-commerce growth has to come at the expense of brick and mortar, or vice versa, right? So as CPGs and retailers are thinking about e-commerce as a channel to drive demand and increase adoption or penetration for their brands, it's important to keep in mind that we're still looking at a sum of one at the end of the day.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier that digital shelf, if you will, the flexible pricing was more a strategy of e-commerce. But at the same time, I can go online and I can compare the price of something, maybe a larger purchase, across multiple retailers to make sure that I'm getting the best deal. Do people do that with grocery? I mean, I know we're hunting for the best deals. We're probably using circulars, but when it comes to e-commerce, I don't know that I would be price checking peanut butter from one CPG to the next, one retailer to the next.
Yeah, I think the aspects around e-commerce from a consumer standpoint is not so much price comparison across channels or retailers. It's more about delivering consistent pricing online versus at the shelf, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I buy the same product online and have it delivered home, should I be paying a higher price than purchasing it in the store myself, right? And there is a wide range of strategies, and I think that retailers that are ensuring price consistency and transparency are probably winning more than the ones that are trying to make online purchases to be higher priced because of the convenience that it offers.
Yep.
Right. But of course, the strategy changes when the delivery mechanism is different. So when you think about a same day delivery or 2-hour delivery window or buying through channels like Instacart or Uber or Amazon through Whole Foods, those are definitely premium priced and can be justified pretty well for the convenience.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of those manufacturer strategies for this.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of different things manufacturers are doing. One is related to the changing product assortments, right? And the second is what we're terming shrinkflation, right? Which is basically downsizing the products but maintaining the prices. And then the third aspect is around changing promotion and merchandising strategies, right? So let's tackle that one at a time and start with the product assortment. So what we've seen as the demand in the store and online has increased, CPGs have become very smart about rethinking their assortment. The long tail of UPCs that had a low sales rate disappeared very quickly from the shelf in 2020, right? CPGs focused on meeting demand by streamlining production to their higher selling SKUs and larger packs. And shoppers have adjusted to that pretty quickly, right? For them,
can I just say, not necessarily willingly. We
not necessarily willingly,
yeah.
Right? Because they still want the variety and they still want the choice on the shelf, but they would rather have the product available to buy when they're in the store than having a very particular product that they used to buy before.
Yeah,
right?
Agreed.
So what we've seen is that the sales rate or the velocity for some of the products has changed dramatically since the onset of the pandemic, right? So assortment is shrinking, but sales are still rising, right? And that's a new dynamic for CPGs and retailers, and they have to continuously think about what they put on the shelf to cater to the demand.
Yep, and I think that becomes even more of a draw, if you will, or a trip driver for certain retailers, like having the right assortment for their shopper base versus,
That's right.
Maybe a slightly lower price, but not the ability to fulfill as much of your basket at a different retailer.
right? And that may be what is driving the shoppers towards dollar stores and club channel. Let's talk about shrinkflation. So it used to be a rarely used tactic, right? Mainly to handle sudden and unexpected raw material and supply shortages, right? And the historical examples have been with peanut butter, for example, when peanut prices went through the roof. CPGs suddenly changed their standard 16-ounce box to a 15.2-ounce box, right? A 5% reduction in what you get, but for the same price, right? But lately, it seems to have become a fairly common tactic to tackle rising inflation, right? And again, I'm going to quote our September price check report. Food manufacturers are using a variety of price back levers to balance affordability for shoppers amid rising costs, right? And downsizing is becoming a popular strategy employed by a lot of CPGs. We're seeing this across the store. Edible products like ice cream, yogurt, I said peanut butter and bread.
I see it a lot. Yeah, I see it a lot in like the center store and crackers and things like that. Yeah,
exactly. And it's also taking shape in non-edible products such as home cleaning, right? The bathroom cleaner that you buy next may be slightly smaller than you realize, right? Hair care products, shampoo, conditioners are smaller, but you're paying the same price as before per unit, right? And household items like paper towels and bathroom tissues, they're going through downsizing to address inflation, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's important is these are great strategies to help consumers in the short term, but the consumer response needs to be monitored very closely, right, to understand how it's impacting purchase patterns and brand switching, and of course, overall category demand.
Well, if you're talking about a tipping point, this might be it, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. At some point, the smart shoppers are going to realize that they're getting much less than they used to before.
I'm a smart shopper.
I think the other aspect that we wanted to talk about in terms of kind of a manufacturer strategy is around changing promotion and merchandising. Again, it's a pretty well-known fact that at the onset of the pandemic and well into 2020, merchandising slowed down significantly, right? I used to see, the feature from my local retailer Safeway went down from 10 pages to 2 pages, right? Displays went down, promotions went down, right? And CPGs tried their best to meet the elevated demand for products, but since then, as the pandemic evolved and subsided, shoppers have slowly returned to normal shopping patterns, and definitely we've seen merchandising and promotion activity has gone up. Right.
But it's still down considerably. And when I look at promotions, it might be, it's coming back in some categories, but even the depth of the promotion is just not there as it was before.
Right. It's not there. Again, it's related to the high inflation, right? Manufacturers are trying to balance the increase in production costs and the raw material costs with how they want to pass on that increase to the consumers, right? Now they may be, they may have their hands tied in terms of increasing base prices, but going into next year, the expectations are that promotions will be higher to help ease the burden on the consumer wallets.
And honestly, we anticipated that promotions were going to come back a lot faster because people are starting to shop multiple stores and looking for those deals. And I would have thought that was the way to go. But to your point, even why would a manufacturer want to promote something that they can't guarantee is going to be there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That higher level of demand is what is keeping the prices higher too in some way.
The last is the external factors, the things that manufacturers have no control over. It could be things like weather, it could be supply chain, maybe even work from home, because no one predicted that we would still have 20 or 25% of our workforce working from home.
The economists are forecasting a looming recession. In the last 6 months, expectations for a recession in 2023 have increased, right? What that means is higher unemployment, lower disposable incomes, and you couple that with continuing inflation, it means consumers are going to feel the pinch even more next year, right? And we have seen in the past recessions, this means well for spend at home, right? Consumers are going to shift from, like we talked about earlier, higher priced meals outside of home to a better value for consuming at home, right? But the important thing to remember, again, looking back at the past recessions, is the growth in the store will come from unexpected places, depending on how consumers decide to make those trade-offs.
Yeah, because it's not like the last recession. The last recession, it was an easy thing to trade off from dining away from home to more meals at home. Or when you got into the grocery store, you could trade down to cheaper cuts of meat or more budget meals. And I feel that now consumers are looking at high inflation throughout the store. So to me, it's more challenging than the past, like the Great Recession.
Right. And to that point, they're all spending more time at home. And that's becoming a big factor in driving at-home consumption too, right? Yes, how we source our food at home has changed a lot in the past 3 years, but the big elephant in the room is the surprising durability of working from home, right? Compared to pre-pandemic levels, almost there's still a 20% reduction in work trips. And companies have been slow to force workers back into the office. They're revisiting and revising their policies every 3 months. And expectation is for this to continue pretty strongly into next year. That means, part-time work from home, so that means you're spending hybrid work policies will continue to be there. And that will mean that there is an increase in consumption and demand for at-home products.
Yeah, I don't see that going anywhere. And in fact, our colleagues in the UK just published a report that was published in the Financial Times about how consumers who are having to go to work are packing their own lunch. All these work from home people in the US, many of them would go through a drive-through in the morning for breakfast or stop and pick up a cup of coffee. And that has changed dramatically.
That's right. Definitely there are trade-offs happening. And those will continue to happen as we change our work from home policies.
But at the same time, we know that consumers out there aren't happy, like even the work from home crew, they're not going to be happy with oatmeal for breakfast every single day. There has to be some variety. There has to be some excitement to keep things interesting.
That is exactly right. And that may get us into the next topic around external factors around supply chain uncertainties. What can CPGs confidently put on the shelf, right? That can drive demand for at-home consumption. We've had significant supply chain disruptions in 2020 and 2021, driven by labor shortages, which resulted in more than usual out-of-stock situations on store shelves, right? But in 2022 and heading into 23, these issues like labor shortages have been amplified by other aspects like extreme weather patterns in various parts of the US, conflict in Europe, and even China's zero COVID policy, right? companies are not able to meet the production demand, not just due to labor, but also due to raw material shortages, right? And when a product is not available on shelf, brand loyalties are tested, and new purchase patterns and preferences start to take shape. And as they look into the future, CPGs need to factor in these expected shortages in production to meet the growing demand for at-home consumption.
You're painting, particularly with these external factors, kind of a grim picture. Is there, what is a silver lining? Tell us how smart forecasting can help alleviate some of the challenges around these unknowns, or even around some of the knowns, like consumer behavior.
So how do we prepare for all of these uncertainties, right?
Yeah.
And again, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, it's about thinking about forecasts as scenarios than a baseline, right? Again, all the volatility and uncertainty around these factors, how they're going to evolve and how they will influence consumer purchases, is going to create a confidence interval in the forecast more than we want to plan for.
Right.
So to that, I would say that demand forecasting is as much an art as it is science, and automation and speed to action is more important than ever, right? In the last 2.5 years, as we have engaged on forecasting with a lot of our CPG and retailer clients, we are seeing that they are blending more art into the science to address all these aspects of volatility and uncertainty.
So right? I see the science and I see the automation, which drives that speed to action. But where is the art, the actual decisions that are made? Tell us a little bit more about the art of forecasting.
Yeah. So the tricky part with a lot of these factors that we have talked about is quantification, right? It's understanding how the data is changing and how it is impacting demand. That means doing some sort of modeling, right? And then making some assumptions about how these are going to evolve into the future, right? Now, some aspects like in-store execution are trackable, right? Measurable. Mm-hmm. But when you think about broader aspects like at-home versus out-of-home consumption, or impact of raw material shortages on what's going to be on the shelf and how that will impact consumer demand, those are aspects that are hard to quantify in a model, right? And so you have to think about how to overlay your output from standard econometric models with how these factors might impact demand, right? And that's where the art comes in.
I don't envy you at all.
I'm
sure it's a puzzle that intrigues you every day, but this is a lot to take in, Nagi.
Yeah, it is, and for us and a lot of our clients as well. And I would say that we are working with new data sets, right? COVID has created the need for new data, around mobility, around tracking shopping patterns and how that's impacting purchase patterns, right? And we are constantly collaborating with our clients on new tools and enhancing our solutions to address their evolving needs. And most important is, like I said again, understanding how these factors and their impact is evolving, right? And that assessment helps separate the signals from the noise.
Yeah.
Right. Forecasters need to not only identify these signals, but also actively monitor them, right? So they can respond in real time and support the decisions they make within the organization.
And the signals are going to be different from one company to another, right?
They're going to be different and they're going to be evolving. And a lot of the enhancements we made to our solutions to be real time and putting more power in our clients' hands, right, through the tools and solutions. That's helping them to monitor and react much more quickly than before.
Got it. So that is our silver lining, is that there are tools and there are strategies that work, and it's finding for whatever company you are, finding your own. But to recap, and I usually like to recap, but I think honestly, Nagi, the best recap would be listen to this podcast again and again, because there was so much incredibly valuable information in here. And I think that you started it off by setting the stage, that it's all about the need for agility, agility in demand planning. But there are so many different buckets of things, from consumer behavior, macroeconomic factors that no one has control over, to different manufacturing strategies that really are the larger buckets of inputs. But there's just so many different inputs. You talked about how consumers are shopping and how their behavior is changing and how it just continues to evolve. So I would say I really like the benefit or the upside of helping separate the signals from the noise. That to me is a really interesting thing, because there's just so much data coming in, but there's new tools for making sure that you're looking at the right data and you're able to make the right decisions in real time to keep those forecasts coming. And at the end of the day, my whole mantra is making the shopper the hero. You want to maintain the loyalty of your shoppers, whether you're a retailer or a brand. You have to understand that they're going to hit a tipping point at some, likely estimated maybe in the near future in 2023 with a looming recession. But that consumers are going to need more support than ever. So it's really important to get this forecasting right, control what you can control, and model your outlook for what you can't control as best you can. So with that, Nagi, I want to thank you so much. And I'll be coming back to you for more lessons in forecasting for sure.
That's a wonderful summation, John.
Thanks, Nagi.
Thank you for listening. Please become a subscriber and let us know what you want to learn more about. We'll serve it up in a future IRI Growth Insights episode. Look for us wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to review IRI Growth Insights. Also, visit us on the web at iriworldwide.com and connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.